So I would like to begin by thanking the organizers for this very significant event, commemorating and remembering SELVI, one of my dear friends. And as we all know, and as we have already realized, the remembrance and commemoration, they are extremely important, not just for the healing, but also for us to create new solidarities for the future well-being of all different communities in Sri Lanka. And this event is doubly significant because if we look at the history, we see that the Tamils commemorating and remembering all their victims and all kinds of atrocities like July 83 pogrom and the Muliwaikal genocidal massacres and genocide and all the thing. And Muslims remembering and commemorating the eviction of them from the Jaffna Peninsula by LTT. And then the Sinhala people remembering and commemorating all kinds of atrocities committed on the society by various militant groups, including LTT, right? So the committees have been remembering and commemorating. But what I have been arguing since 1990 is that if we really want to understand the complexities and if we really want to operate on the level of solidarity, the Tamils should be remembering and commemorating the atrocities committed by the Tamils or the Tamil militant movements. And the Sinhala people should be remembering and commemorating the atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan state. Right. So in that sense, it's extremely important. I think it's extremely important that you all have organized this particular remembrance for SELVI. And that should be the way for all of us to think about how we can organize remembering and commemoration that would create a very powerful form of organic solidarity. So that is the reason why I was so happy and so glad to be part of this meeting and to share some of my thinkings. I'm also really glad that because of this, the emergence of new social media and all kinds of new generation people out there, people that came after our generation of the 1980s and the 1990s, and they do not have adequate experiences, or they haven't really had a chance to witness the atrocities that were committed several years ago, say since 1979, July 29, ever since the emergency was declared in Jaffna and the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So this is a kind of a new generation coming to life, coming to realize the importance of politics and importance of solidarity. And this particular kind of new generation among the Sinhalese people, the Muslim people, and the Tamil people, there is a great opportunity to understand all the past without any kind of biases. And that is a kind of the time that we are witnessing. I witness, especially through social media, that lots of very active Sinhalese youngsters and the Muslim youngsters and the Tamil youngsters are engaging in the very useful and productive dialogue. So I see it as a sign of progress and a sign of hope. And this particular meeting today is one of the important signs. So I would like to thank again for the organizers. I'm also very glad to see my dear friend and comrade Sita Ranjani appearing after a very long time. She has been a partner of our struggle, our resistance struggle for a very long time. Such a very committed activist, journalist, and a poet. So I'm glad that she is able to join us today. As some of you may know, that SELVI has been a very dear friend of mine for a very long time. I first met her to her partner and another revolutionary, the resistance fighter, Ashok Yogan Kannamuthu. I really wanted him to be part of it today, but I couldn't reach him on time. That was when I was a young student at the University of Jaffna. So ever since, Shelby and I had a very good friendship, even though I did not belong to any particular Tamil militant group at that point, any point, because I always wanted to maintain my freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And I'll tell you more about the freedom of expression later. And even though Ashok and Shelby were part of People's Liberation Organization of Tamil, also known as PLAT, I was very friendly with a lot of fighters from various militant groups. And Shelby, as a writer and as a theater personality and as a journalist, literary journalist. Literary journalism means writing about publishing a magazine on literature, criticism, art, and poetry and theater. So that's kind of she excelled in that kind of literary journalism. And one of the important things that I would like to remember now is after my university time, I started working for the Saturday Review, the one and only English language weekly newspaper published from Jaffna. And it was the only English newspaper published outside Colombo. And the paper was banned in 1983 after the pogroms, but it was extremely difficult for the paper to come back to life in 1984 because there were not enough people ready and courageous enough to start and run the newspaper. So finally, a Sinhalese journalist from the South, actually from Maharagama, my mentor and my guru, Gamini Navaratne. So he's the one who was willing to come to Jaffna and live in Jaffna and edit the newspaper. He used to be a columnist for the Saturday Review. He used to write a column called Political Cursory for Saturday Review, and he has been a supporter of the Tamil resistance for justice and equality ever since 1956. So he has a long history of supporting the Tamil struggle. So he was such a strong man. And he came to Jaffna, and he's the one who recruited me to work at the Saturday Review. So at that time, he was the one and only Sinhalese civilian living in Jaffna. All the others were Sinhalese soldiers. And the difficulty was when Gamini comes to Jaffna, and those days from, between 1984 and 1986, 1987, it was extremely difficult. There were not regular communications or transport between Jaffna and Colombo. Most of the time there were checkpoints in the transport, no train services. And most of the time, if Gamini wants to return to Colombo, he needs to take various buses and go to Vavuniya, and from Vavuniya, we need to put him safely on a bus to Colombo, right? It needs to happen every 3 months or every 6 months, sometime, a couple of times a month. So it was actually SELVI. Shelby used to live in Vavuniya. Her village is Sermamadu. So what usually happens when Gamini wants to return to Colombo, Shelby and I would take him sometime by bicycle, sometime in the motor bicycle, sometime in buses, and we'll take him to Vavuniya. And in Vavuniya, very carefully, we'll put him on. It was not because, when I say very carefully, it was not because of any Tamil-Sinhalese conflict, because it was completely controlled by the military and the kind of special commandos. So we were so scared, right? And we didn't want to cross the path to the special commandos that were in control of Vavuniya. And, I do not want to go into details about what happened, but that was without Shelby's help. I don't think Gamini would have had this kind of, the travel, the transport between Jaffna and Vavuniya. So after safely sending Gamini off to Anuradhapura, we always used to return to Shelby's village in Sermamadu. and spend a few days there. And then when the situation is better, we would return to Jaffna. So that kind of a very close relationship I had with her and with her family. And although I was very close to her partner, Ashok, for a very long time, he now lives in in France. And I would like to, this is some of the the some remembers something about the past. But I also would like to say a few words about the translation of Selvi's poetry in English. There have been several translations available, but actually she did not have enough time to write poetry. She was abducted and killed by the LTT when she was very young. So what remains of her work is a few poems and a lot of letters that she has written to her friends and comrades. So she's a very good letter writer. I have several letters sent to her, and then lots of my friends also have a lot of letters sent to them by Selvi. So some of her poems have been translated by the very famous academic and a poet and a translator called A.K. Ramanujan. So those poems appeared in an academic and a literary journal called South Asia Bulletin 9 in the in late 1990s. And there were a couple of other poems translated into English, but they are not very many. In a similar way, that there is a magazine that she edited, and Selvi, together with Sivaramani, both of them have become icons of one of the darkest aspects of the Tamil liberation struggle. I still use the word Tamil liberation struggle. At the time when the emergence of it was a liberation struggle. And as I always mention, there was a time that the whole idea of liberation has gone out of out of the window, and the entire thing here has become very nationalist. There's a difference between the nationalist struggles and the national liberation struggle, right? The whole idea of resistant, progressive, resistant, that somehow got derailed in the past. And Selvi and Sivaramani and lots of others as icons are they symbolically tells us what exactly had gone wrong with our struggle. But I would also like to mention one fact. It is not just Selvi and Sivaramani. There are at least about between 95 and 100 writers, the journalists, essayists, and poets that have been killed by the Sri Lankan army, Indian army, and all major Tamil militant groups and all the others, right? There's actually a list of people that were killed. Sita Ranjani and Saravanan prepared it for some of the news. I think it's in the index on censorship. I'm not so sure. But what I wanted to bring your attention is, for example, take this very, very famous, very good street theater activist called B.M. Kugaraja and Jayakumar. B.M. Kugaraja and Jayakumar were killed by the Indian Army simply for performing. And Kugaraja's daughter she lives in Colombo now. Navayuga Kugaraja, she's a famous director and a famous filmmaker in Colombo. She acts in Sinhalese and Tamil films. She produces her own film. And there was this extremely good friend of mine, I. Shanmugalingan. He used to work for Ilanadu. And when the IPK came and landed, the EPRLF, ENDLF, and all the other Tamil militant groups that were working with the Indian Army, they took over the newspaper office. And they did not let a single journalist to leave for home. They were all confined in the newspaper office, and they were forced to publish the newspaper defending IPKF and EPRLF for several months. When they were gone, LTT came in, arrested all of them, and they took Shanmulingam and shot him dead just for supporting EPRLF. He had no choice at the time, right? They were all forced. In a similar fashion, there was this very famous writer, S. Bose, the great poet, the great Tamil poet, who's from Bavaniya, from Shelby's place, and who was killed by one of the Tamil militant groups. So I can go on, but what the point I want to raise here is, well, depending on, it is because certain kind of political and social context, certain icons become very popular, like Rajani, like Shwaramani, like Selvi, and like, some of the journalists like Taraki, right? And I also would like to remind everyone here that I can understand. There are certain people, there is a hierarchy of remembrance. There's a hierarchy of tragedy. There's a hierarchy of sorrow. But it is as progressive people, and it is us who really value the idea of solidarity among various actors, various groups, various communities. It is our important, the most important responsibility to remember every writer, every poet, every journalist, every artist that has been killed, disappeared. So it is a kind of it's a kind of a forest. If we want to see the forest, we should see the forest. We should not simply satisfy by looking at one single tree, right? I'm making this point because in the past several years, I see the selective commemoration and the selective remembrance of people who were killed by this one or that one. But I do not think that kind of a selective remembrance, it is actually necessary for people who are very dear to the particular person. They can do it. We have every right to commemorate and remember Shelby because she's close to us. We are writers, we are journalists. That is fine. But at the same time, we also need to think as a kind of a collective remembrance for all the writers and poets that were killed, all the journalists, right? That is the main point I want everyone to realize and think about for the future. Right? And my final point is, Shelby was killed, and I had to leave several times. I had to leave Sri Lanka. Several times I escaped from death. It's mainly because of freedom of expression. One of the reasons why I was very reluctant initially, and later I was proven right, that not a single organization, whether it's the government or the militants, were willing to accept or understand the importance of the freedom of expression, the freedom to write, freedom of association. I guarantee you, not a single established organization, institution that are hell-bent on getting any and gaining power, they will not be able to do anything with the freedom of expression, right? Nothing. This is what I have learned in the past 35 years of doing all kinds of work. And the people and the writers, especially who value the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, will never be able to be part of any of this kind of organization. And Shelby is an important symbol. She valued the freedom of expression, freedom to write, but that was not available. The same thing happened to us. Newspapers were bombed. Our great friend, Rudramoorthy, as Sita Ranjani mentioned, she disappeared in Colombo. She was working for Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. And we know it was the Sri Lankan intelligence with the help of EPDP that they were responsible for the disappearance of him. We know, but we do not have any kind of thing to go and make case. So the whole thing that we need to do, my final and last point, is it is important to maintain the right to opinion, the freedom of expression, freedom to write. I may argue at any circumstances. So that is the key. That is what we need to pay attention to when we think about SELVI, and we think about all kinds of other people who sacrifice their lives and their work for the freedom of expression. Thank you very much for this opportunity.